other kind of stuff. And I tell you, this is really, uh, it has been a challenge for me in looking at the fact that 90% of my district was impacted and trying to be everywhere, trying to do um, everything that you think needs to be done, and then feeling sometimes that you're kind of falling short. And so that word was for me and reminding me that it is truly all in God's hand. And that which we think we can do, God already has it under control. So thank you so much for that. I want to kind of give a little testimony. I want to kind of start off with some good news for individuals who especially live in North Baton Rouge before we bring up our guest today. I was so excited when I learned that we were going to get, or we are getting, a urgent, no, I'm sorry, emergency room in North Baton Rouge. Praise be to God, hallelujah. In spite of it all, in spite of the great budget deficits, which it seemed near to impossible, Pastor, that we were going to get an emergency room in North Baton Rouge, but God. And that's what I keep saying, but God, because He knows that we need an emergency room in North Baton Rouge, and we know that seconds count, and we know that we have a great population in North Baton Rouge, and we know also about the health disparities in North Baton Rouge. And so it was critically important that we have an ER in North Baton Rouge. So I was so happy when I received the news and when I heard that it was coming, and by this time next year, it will be built. Say this time next year, we will have the ER. Hallelujah. Isn't that wonderful? That is some good news. And so I really would like to thank the governor for his insight in terms of making that happen. And I tell you, it kind of came about in some unusual ways, but again, but God. But God. Is Brother Carlton here? Carlton Miller? Does he work for the governor's office? And okay, okay. But I certainly was going to ask him to come up. But I am very happy that we have some individuals who, and some individuals will be joining us because I told them that the meeting will start at 11. And so I'm sure that they'll be coming in very shortly. But um, I am very excited that I've had, this may be number 10 or 11, disaster recovery meetings. And every time I call these individuals, they show up. I mean, any day of the week. I've had meetings on every day of the week almost. I think the only that I haven't had one, maybe it's a Wednesday. Maybe, but I can't even remember. I mean, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and they're there. So when they come up, please give them a hand of applause for their consistency and their commitment to ensuring that individuals receive information. That has been extremely important because one of the things I have found to be most helpful is just making sure that people know what information is available so that they can make the best decision for their lives. Last night, I watched a movie, and I'm not going to say the name of the movie, and I was trying to go to sleep because I had just came home. I just flew in yesterday, and I had a very good trip. And I'm going to ask you guys specifically before I bring them up to pray with me about something that God has given me. But I watched this movie last night. It was about a veteran who had come home. He had a drinking problem. His family lived like in this out in the wilderness almost, and he was at home supposedly watching his son, but he was drinking, and his son fell and hit his head, and his son died. And so his wife left him. So he was at home, this big old house by himself, and this little girl who likes to take pictures was taking pictures at a grave site. Someone related to her family had died, and her uncle asked her not to take pictures, but she didn't listen. And she was taking pictures, and while she was taking pictures, this man who was a bounty hunter came and killed the people who were at the service. And when the uncle started looking for the little girl, he realized that somebody else was on the scene, the bounty hunter. So he chased the little, he killed the uncle, chased the little girl, and she ended up running into the house where the man was. Well, long story short, the bounty hunter and the veteran ended up kind of going back and forward, and it was kind of like a standoff between the two. And the little girl ended up being very key in the movie. At one point in the movie, he tried to let the little girl go free. The veteran did to get out of the house so that she could be free. He was going to just go ahead and, because he had already written a handwritten note that he was going to go ahead and take his life. But it didn't work out that way. So at the end of the movie, the bounty hunter, of course, is killed. And the little girl ends up with the man. And so what the God showed me was, you never know in terms of the situation of what you're going through and what really seems to be very tragic, which is really what you said today also, Pastor, in essence. God gave that man, and his wife came back because she heard how bad his drinking had gotten, and had gotten wind, and he was looking at committing suicide. And the wife came back. God gave them another chance and gave them another child. And it really blessed me. And I was trying to go to sleep, and I couldn't go to sleep. The movie was so intense. But the man was a lot before he got to that point. He got shot a couple of times. First, he got shot when the little girl was running to him. He got shot. And then when he tried to get the girl to leave, but she did not leave, he came down as a sacrifice to the man, and he ended up getting shot again. But God made him whole, and then made his family whole with bringing his wife back. And so I say all of that in recovering all sometimes, it may not look like what we think it looks like, but that's my confession that we will, this area will, this community will recover all. It may not look like what you had before, but you will recover all. And that is my prayer. I decree it. I believe it. I speak it. I wrote all that down. I'm not looking, but I wrote it down. And that's what I'm confessing over my district, over this city, over this region, because we can speak things, and it will come to pass. That's what the Word of God says. If we declare and decree it, it shall come to pass. And I just thank the Lord that I am in this position for such a time as this, and that there is power that resides in me that I am going to exercise, that we will see the manifestation of God making us whole. So with that, I'm going to ask these two gentlemen to come up, and I know that we have others that are coming, and as they come, they will introduce themselves and talk about which department they are from. And the way I would like to do this, because what I have found to be most effective is that individuals are able to ask a question. So you allow them to do is to introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about the department that they actually are working in, and then allow you to ask the questions that you need, because that's the most important part about this, is making sure that we can get answers. Now, I have some sign-in sheets that I would like to ask you guys to please fill out, because we are transitioning. I think there are going to be several transitions through this whole process. And so I think now people are in the transition of rebuilding. You know, they're kind of assessing where they are, they're looking at their options, and then they're going to make choices about what next. And what I would like to do is begin having kind of like telephone conference calls once a week. They can give you an update in terms of, you know, what's happening next. Because I think that the most important part again is information. And I know people cannot continue to come to meetings, but I want to make sure that you stay informed and that you know what's going on, and you can ask questions, and you know where to go to ask questions, and you know who to talk to, because that's nothing worse than getting misinformation or no information. And so we want to make sure that you are able to do that, and we'll put you in a database. And my goal is to have that up and running by next Monday. And so my plan is to have every Monday evening, probably about 6:30 or 7, where you can listen in to individuals who are still working in the field to try to make sure that this long-term recovery process is working. And consequently, the governor has set up a task force, recovery task force, that will be providing information and looking at next steps. Now, before I bring them up, the conference that I just came from, I am one. I've been selected by the Kellogg Foundation to participate in, which is a great honor. It is called the Quad Caucus, and the Quad Caucus actually represents four different ethnicities. So it's African American, Native American.
I have a couple of questions for Shelter at Home and for FEMA and SBA and concerning that rental assistance. For Shelter at Home, when I initially applied for Shelter at Home, it took so long for it to get going that I've already started work in my home. And I'm just wondering, because I'm still not staying there, is it possible for me to still use Shelter at Home?
I apologize on behalf of Shelter at Home, but yes, it is possible for you to still use Shelter at Home. If I can get your information before we leave, we'll make sure that you get plugged in immediately.
Okay. Now, my other question is concerning FEMA and SBA. I don't know if it's a cap on FEMA, the amount of assistance that FEMA was given, but it almost makes it seem like we're forced to use SBA to get a loan when everybody's not able to afford a loan.
Yeah, good point. So let me touch on the process generally just a little bit, understanding that each person's specific situation may be a little bit differently. FEMA individual assistance, so the assistance that would come to a homeowner or to a renter for either property, house, and contents, or as a renter just for contents, does have limitations. The program has limitations that they have to operate on, and those limitations make it complicated and difficult to understand. But the first step is to apply with FEMA. They will coordinate with you for an inspection, and I'm assuming, based upon where we are in the process, that everybody that has been through that process should have at least had the initial inspection. If you haven't had that, please come and talk to me afterwards. And then following that inspection, there's going to be some sort of correspondence that comes to you from FEMA that either says, here is the funding that you're eligible for, it's rental assistance, it's some amount of repair assistance, or here's an ineligible letter, and these are the reasons that you're ineligible and how to appeal. But in general, if someone did not have flood insurance, okay, and they go and apply for FEMA for funding to repair their house, FEMA does have a cap of $33,000 of what they are limited in providing. Now, we should be clear that $33,000 only serves that. There are only a small percentage that actually get to that point. So what's FEMA doing when they go and inspect? What they're doing in inspecting is the guidelines that they have to operate on are, is it reasonable and necessary? So if you've got a 4-bedroom house and before the storm only 3 of those bedrooms were occupied, they're only inspecting 3 of the bedrooms. The 4th bedroom that was not occupied, they're not inspecting, and they're not calculating any loss there, even though you had loss from the way that their program works. That bedroom was not necessary because someone was not occupying it before the storm. So you see how complicated this gets, right? Let's say that you had a tile floor, and certainly that floor took on water. But they may not be calculating damages to that tile floor because it was deemed that it could be left there after the storm. Whereas if a neighbor had wood floor, they were getting credit for the damages to that wood floor because that wood floor was going to have to come up. So in each of these circumstances, the way the FEMA calculation works for repair varies greatly from property to property, and it is limited. There's nobody, let me just speak generally for a second. There's nobody that's repairing their house and putting it back the way it was with FEMA individual assistance. I wish that the answer was different. I wish that the program was more flexible. I wish that it was able to do more than it does. But that's the first piece. Now, then what happens is, so that's nothing to do with contents. That's only the property and the structure itself. So if you didn't have flood insurance, FEMA will calculate the loss with that inspection and determine what they can give you for repair costs. And generally, those repair costs are much lower. What they give you for repair is much lower than what it's actually going to cost to put the home back together. And so there's a gap. Literally, everybody that goes through that process without insurance has a gap. Now, the gap may be different for each and every person, but there's a gap. And the way the federal program is designed is that SBA is then designed to provide a loan to help address that gap. Now, there are a number of people that apply and meet with SBA, and SBA determines, based on their repayment ability, that SBA can't loan them the money for that gap. There are a number of people that meet with SBA and talk about the terms and all of that sort of thing for that gap, and are still deciding, I don't know if I want to do this or not. The other thing that I would add is that those are the programs that we know today. What we also know is that Congress is working to provide additional funding to the state through something largely called Community Development Block Grant Funding, CDBG, that's also there to address that gap. So we just don't know how much that's going to be, how fast it will be here, and everything that we're going to be able to do with that funding. But generally, that's the process. If you didn't have insurance for repair, you're going to get some repair costs through FEMA individual assistance, but it's not going to be enough. You're going to be left with a gap, and then you meet with SBA to talk about what to do with that gap. And then either they're going to say, we can lend you funding, and this is what it's going to look like, and you make a decision there, or they're going to tell you that they can't. And then that leaves people with that gap, and that's part of what this congressional work is trying to do, is to try to provide additional funding to help with those unmet needs. Now, as it relates to contents, if you didn't have flood insurance, if you did have flood insurance, but for your structure, but you didn't have it for your contents, and that's a lot of people. Because most people that had flood insurance that I'm aware of, and I'll just use myself as an example, were doing it to comply with the mortgage, and the mortgage requires you to have a certain level of flood insurance on the structure. Nothing, they don't tell you anything about the contents. That's left on us to figure out. So a lot of people are in that situation where had it on the structure, but didn't have it on the contents. FEMA is going to largely say, for contents, talk to SBA first. And then, based upon that SBA conversation, SBA, if they're not able to loan you the money for those contents, can then forward you back to FEMA for something called other needs assistance, largely contents. And so that's complicated. I wish that it was a more straight line process. I wish it was one button that you could push and that would make it work. But yes, FEMA and SBA are designed by the federal government to work together, but they do leave people with difficult choices to make in terms of, do I want to or do I have to take out a loan through SBA in order to recover? And in some cases, with what we know today, those are the options that are on the table. We're hoping in the near future, through what Congress is doing and the governor is working on, that there are additional options that we can put out there. But we don't know what those options are exactly right now.
Native American, Hispanic, and the Vietnamese communities. And so we need to look at policies that actually influence or change the lives of all these different ethnicities. And so one of the things that came up during the conference was housing. And housing was an issue pre-flood. Today, before I came here, I called someone from Red Cross, and they shared with me, they said, I've never seen anything like this before. She said, I've worked recovery for in many different areas, and she said the housing stock here is very bad. Then she said, plus, in addition to that, some people just really are not connected to anybody else, or they didn't have the finances. So she said it's made their job just even more difficult in terms of helping individuals who are trying to So while I was there, one of the things that I was made privy to was how we can actually change certain laws and put some things into place with funding that's coming down now for housing. And so my prayer and what I would like to be in agreement with is that we do come up with some housing initiatives that really help to get people on their feet, that really help people become more self-sufficient, and that is housing that is really can cater this population of people. Unfortunately, we have a lot of renters in this community, and my goal is really to get people to home ownership. So that is my prayer, and I'm asking you to join me that when we receive this money, we're getting it in phases as we get the money, that we are really able to do something that is really beneficial to help families become really efficient and safe. And housing is one of the biggest issues. Housing, it all goes together, it all works hand in hand. But when somebody does not have a safe place to stay, almost nothing else really matters if you don't have a safe place to go. So with that, that is going to be my prayer. And I just saw someone walk in, and how you doing? I don't have my glasses on. I just saw you walk in, but I know you're here. Okay, so I'm going to ask if everybody will come up. Casey Tingle is from the governor's office. Mr. Ron is from insurance. Somebody told in one of my meetings, somebody said, "Yeah, you come sit right here in the hot seat." They told me the insurance person. Azron is from AECOM and Sheltered Home Program. Harry Chauvin is from the city, building and permits. Stephen Hartman from the Attorney General's office. And so with that, I am going to turn it over. We're going to start with Casey Tingle. Casey has attended every meeting I've invited him to. Every meeting on every day because of the time. And I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Casey, for being here again today. Casey has also been impacted by the flood. And so he really knows and identifies with where you are. Just want y'all
Good
to know.
morning. Thank you for sticking around, and there's going to be some things that we probably say in this sort of general time of information that may be helpful to you. But most of all, I want you to be sure to say that if there's a question that you have, feel free to ask it when we get to that time frame. If there's a question that you have that maybe you're not comfortable saying out loud or whatever that case may be, we're going to stick around. I will be here until nobody else is. So feel free to stick around afterwards and come up, and we can speak individually about your particular case and about your particular situation. I work for the Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness. We call it GOSEP. And we, in addition to having our main office over on the State Police Motor Vehicle Compound, we also occupy with FEMA the Joint Field Office right over here off of Florida Boulevard in the old Godchall's building. So I work every day just down the street from your church facility here. We don't do directly very much at all, but what we do every day is coordinate with FEMA on all of the aspects of the recovery. We manage the shelter at home program. You'll hear a little bit more about that at the end. But generally what I wanted to say just in these opening remarks is to remind you of just a few things. One is we want you to know and have the information that you need relative to getting stable. So there are some phases to this recovery, as Senator Barrow mentioned. The first one is really focused on safety in the immediate aftermath of any event like what we just had is getting people safe, whether that's in a shelter or whether that's with friends and family, whatever that looks like, getting people rescued and safe And I think all of you are aware that in this event, we were truly blessed that we didn't have more loss of life given the circumstances of what was going on. The rate at which water was rising, the places that water was going that it had never gone before, so people had no expectation that there would be any type of flooding to their particular neighborhood or their house. Um, the number of first responders and National Guard and all of these individuals that were doing search and rescues all during the day and all during the night. The volunteers that came to our town to help us in launching boats from driveways and from parking lots to go in and help people get to dry ground was truly remarkable. The volunteer community, the faith-based community that helped people to clean out their house or to get food or to, all of these sorts of things. What I'm trying to say is that this process and recovery involves everybody. It involves neighbor helping neighbor and family helping family and church helping church. My church in Central just today is going to have the last group, I think, from Missouri leave and go back home. But since this storm happened, we've had churches from probably 10 or 15 different states that have come and stayed in our gym while they help people clean out their houses and a part of that. We couldn't do this. We couldn't recover without what our friends and families have done for us and what our neighbors have done for us and what church and faith-based communities have done to assist. But as it relates to FEMA, so that's kind of what I wanted just to go over really quickly. There are a few things that I want you to know. One is, if you've not registered with FEMA for individual assistance, gone through that registration process, either with the 1-800 number or disasterassistance.gov, there is a deadline that's coming up that I want you to know about, and that is October 13th is the current deadline to register with FEMA. I'm assuming that most of you have, and most of you probably have had some sort of outcome that you probably want to talk about relative to that. But I just want you to know, and I want you to help us share that message to maybe those that aren't as connected through social media or whatever else, that October the 13th is the deadline for registering with FEMA. October the 13th is also the deadline for applying with the Small Business Administration. There's nothing that says you have to have made a decision with Small Business Administration, SBA, relative to a loan by the 13th, but you've got to get your foot in the door with SBA by the 13th. You still are going to control the process in terms of, do I want some money from SBA? Do I agree to their terms? Does this work for me? But we just want you to know that you've got a deadline to get your foot in the door and get your particular application made. That buys you the time to then make the decisions that work for you moving forward. All right? So those are two particular deadlines. In addition, the state, through FEMA, the state has requested that FEMA authorize what's called Transitional Sheltering Assistance, or TSA. You probably are more familiar with that if you're utilizing that. It's basically FEMA paying the cost of a hotel room for survivors to be able to stay and live in that hotel room. That's currently authorized through the night of October the 18th. The state is going to be requesting that be extended, but I just wanted to touch on that. Is there anybody that's utilizing TSA or staying in a hotel that FEMA is paying for? Okay, so I'll just leave that there. If you know somebody, let them know that there is a deadline of the 18th, but the state is going to be requesting that be extended, and as soon as we know more, we're going to be putting that additional information out there. Now, the phase that we're in is really about getting stable. Not everybody's damaged residence is able to be stable at this point. So what can we do? What can we do for housing as we enter this phase of where we are? And so I mentioned transitional sheltering assistance, but that's really staying in a hotel. That's really short term. That's really just to kind of meant to bridge the gap to the next step. So what are the next steps? There are a few. One is shelter at home, and I'm going to let Ezra talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But shelter at home is basically a program that the state of Louisiana has never done before. But given the need this time, we determined that we needed to learn about it and try to figure out how to do it. And so that's what we're doing. Shelter at home does not fix your house. It does not put your house in any way back to like it was. But what it does seek to do is to try to determine if up to $15,000 of work can be done to make your house habitable, safe, sanitary. Then it's a program to allow you to have some living space back in your damaged house, back in your subdivision, back in your neighborhood and community, to be back with your neighbors, hopefully have your kids have the familiar same ride to school and all of those things. That's one option. For some people, it's an option that works very well. For other people, it's not an option that works that well. So I'm trying to give you the option so that you kind of understand how that works. A second option is a manufactured housing unit. FEMA calls these MHUs. You may have seen some of those. You probably have seen some of the stories about them. Many of you probably remember, like I do after Katrina, that FEMA had a program that was similar to this, but it was travel trailers. And there were issues with those travel trailers. But one of the things that the travel trailers did well was they allowed you to be back at your house. You could park it in the driveway. You could park it in the front yard. You could park it next to the house on the side. The challenge with these manufactured housing units is they're not that flexible. They have better living conditions. They're safer. They're larger. They're better from that perspective. But they're not as flexible to go where everybody wants them to go. And so depending upon the size of your lot and how the house sits and all of those things, that manufactured housing unit may or may not be able to be located at your damaged dwelling. So what FEMA is doing is they are, for the people that get to that point in the process, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but to the people that get to that point in the process, FEMA goes and does a site inspection and says, is this site feasible for a manufactured housing unit? If you, the survivor, want it at your damaged dwelling, you think it will work, they'll send a team to go do a site inspection to say, yes, this property can work, and this is what we need to do to it to get the utilities there and to get the unit placed. But in a lot of situations, it can't be. There's just not room. It's not feasible for one reason or another. And so what FEMA is doing is they are working with commercial mobile home parks and sites to put these manufactured housing units, as many as they can, into those sites. So that's another option when they come to you and say, okay, if it doesn't work at your house, we have a site here. And they give you that information, and then you have the ability to say, yes, that's a place that works for me. That's close enough to home, that's close enough to school, that's close enough to my community. Or no, it doesn't. And I'd like to hear about some other options. So that's basically how manufactured housing units work. There's about typically a 3-week lag time just because there's some complications in getting those units installed and sited and all of those pieces of the puzzle. And then the third piece is that many of you probably have received through FEMA rental assistance. One of the first things that comes through that registration process, and FEMA determines that you've had damage to your dwelling, one of the first things that they feed back to you, maybe even before they deny a repair cost or give you money for a repair cost, is they send you probably maybe like 2 months of rental assistance. And so that rental assistance is intended for you to be able to locate an apartment or some other type of housing that you can rent to get stable. Now, there's some challenges with that as well. A lot of the places that the apartments are located are not near the areas that were impacted, and so they require somebody having to cross town or go to another part of Baton Rouge or something like that. That's some of the feedback that we've gotten. In addition, landlords are not exactly always flexible enough to say, yes, we'll do a month-to-month lease and make it as flexible for you as they possibly can. FEMA's giving you the rental assistance month to month after those first 2 months. but the landlord's saying you got to sign a lease for 6 months, and that puts you in a bind because I don't know if I'm going to get 6 months from FEMA yet because I'm not to that point. So rental assistance is the third option. So basically, shelter at home, manufactured housing unit, rental assistance. Right now are the three ways through the state and FEMA to get into a stable housing situation while you work out the funding options and the issues with repairing and getting back into your house somewhat like it was and getting recovered. That's really the third phase, is that recovery phase of getting things back to some extent like they were before. So I talked a lot. I'm going to be here to answer any questions that you have. I just wanted to touch housing is the big issue right now, and I wanted to kind of give you an overview of what we know relative to housing, and certainly be available to answer any questions as we get to that point later on. That way.
Good morning. I like to say praise the Lord. Good to be in the house of the Lord. Just to talk briefly about the Shelter at Home program. How many of you have heard of the Shelter at Home program? How many of you have registered for the Shelter at Home program? Oh, okay. All right. I'm in the right place. Well, Shelter at Home, as Casey did say, is a program that is run under the auspices of GOSEP. Our company, our firm, AECOM, was hired as the program manager to support this particular program. Well, this program is simply to get folks back to their properties. You heard of the many options that may have been available to you. This is one of many options that may be available to you, but it's probably one of the ones designed to keep folks in their communities, get them back in their homes, get their kids back in their school district, and so that they can operate in some sense of normalcy there. Now, Shelter at Home is not going to give you pre-disaster things. You know, it's not going to get you back to a pre-disaster stage. Why? Because it's something designed as a quick fix to get you back in the community until some long-term sustainable solutions are developed to assist with long-term recovery, housing recovery. So what's covered under the Shelter at Home program? There's minor temporary repairs externally as well as interior. But we've been primarily focused on interior. Let me just go over a few. Inspection and testing of electrical, HVAC, and plumbing systems to ensure that they're in a safe working order. Removing drywall and insulation and other water-absorbing coverings. Removing flood damage, water. Disposing debris at the street right-of-way. Cleaning and sanitizing exposed floor and wall surfaces. Making sure that your plumbing is in order. Giving you appliances to make sure that you're able to cook. Make sure that you're able to take a bath. So we want to make sure that there's toilet, there's a bathtub, shower, so on and so forth. So these are things designed to make sure that you're able to sustain yourselves and your family until those more long-term solutions are developed. Who's eligible? If you've had damage, if you can document residency, and if you own the property. Okay? If you can document damage, residency, and own the property. Let me just give you some simple statistics of where we are today. The program has been in existence for about a month right now. Okay, and it's only one other time that this program has been implemented nationwide. So this is the second time, as I understand. And so, of course, there are going to be some bumps in the road, but again, it's designed to make sure that you can get back to your property. To date, as of this morning, we've had over 20,000 applicants to the program. We deemed eligible 16,311. Okay, as it relates to in the construction process, we have about 6,196 currently in the construction process, but we've scheduled site visits for 10,116. So we're about at 16,000. That's somewhere in the construction process. Okay, now who's completed? You know, within these last couple of weeks, we have about 588 families that have been signed off on. We call it a final site visit, so they're ready to go. Within the next week, we should also sign off on another 535. So we've had an infusion. We've ramped up with contractors within the community statewide. We've hired nine contractors that are assisting with the program, and we have many subcontractors that are working under those contractors within your communities that are assisting with these programs. I forget the number, but I think we have about 300 and something contractors, inclusive of the major contractors. Now, give you the process. It's simple. You can apply. You can walk into our office and apply, which is at 7389 Florida Boulevard. I think it's Bonferré Center. We're on the first floor. You can walk in and apply. You can apply online at www.shelterathome.la.gov, or you can call, and one of our case managers or call center representatives will be able to assist you and walk you through the guidelines of the program. Once you are deemed eligible, here's the next thing that happens. You should get a call for an initial site visit. This is where a representative of AECOM, designated contractor, and the homeowner, they do a walkthrough of your property to see what can be done within the parameters of the $15,000. Now, just to give you a sense of what those repairs look like, again, these are not your granite tops. These are designed to get you back in your properties. I think if you can help with that, I actually have another one here as well. Okay, these are some of the things that are covered under the program. Again, let's think about the intent, not what it looks like. Okay, so we want to make sure that we're able to get you back there. And so we do the initial site visit, and once the scope is determined between the inspector, the homeowner, as well as the contractor, the homeowner signs off. Everyone signs off on that scope of work. Step 3, the repairs are scheduled. You should receive a call from our office scheduling those repairs. Next, the actual construction process. Guess what? You may have several contractors that come at different times in your property, whether it's plumbing or electrical. They may come at various times. So you may have one contractor leave, but don't think that it's done. The process is completed. There may be a continuation. You'll know when it's done when we schedule you and tell you we're ready for a final site visit. You will get a call scheduling that final site visit, and we want to make sure that the repairs are of quality and done in accordance with the scope of work that has been determined and signed off by the homeowner. Okay, that's a simple process. On average, every situation is different because we try to be accommodating to the homeowner. Some of you are not in your properties right now. You're having to travel from relatives. I've even known of folks having to travel from New Orleans to accommodate the inspection process. So we want to make sure that we are accommodating to you. So when I give you this number, don't think that this is a length of time, but we're averaging about 9 days from eligibility to completion. Okay, about 9 days. That's give and take, and it's sometimes contingent on your availability. I do know that there's limited documentation that we need to receive from you to document eligibility. So there are some time parameters in there that may vary and very capricious. And so we want to make sure that we get you through the process as quickly as possible. Again, Shelter at Home program, if you have any questions about it, I'll be around to answer any of those after the seminar here. But this is a program that can get you back quickly if it is the best option for you.
Concerning that rental assistance, you stated that, how did you say it? Okay, if you have rental assistance and you're staying with a landlord, you have a landlord. But if you're staying with a family or friend, when you try to get the continued rental assistance, the application is so difficult, it's almost impossible.
So you've pointed out what makes rental assistance difficult. So rental assistance, FEMA does very little on the front end in terms of giving people the first 2 months. So that largely is a pretty quick turnaround through the process. The challenge comes when, let's say that the apartment that I'm staying in makes me pay 1 month up front as a deposit, and then I pay the other half of that for the first month's rent. And so now I've got 1 month's rent, 1 month in that apartment, but I've had to use all of the rental assistance that I have. So in order to get the next month's rental assistance from FEMA, you have to document what you spent the initial piece on. So that would be the lease, that would be the invoices showing that you'd spent it on the property. For those of you that are staying with family and friends, because in this disaster, I think at one point it was almost 3 out of every 4 survivors were living with family or friends at some point in the event. For those of you that are staying with him for an extended period of time, let me go back and ask how we might be able to document that in such a way that continued rental assistance is available. I don't want to say that it's an absolute yes or no at this point, but let me take that back and see what we can do to help make sure that everybody understands how that works. The other thing that I want to say about rental assistance is a lot of people that I've talked to that were in very difficult situation before the storm financially, when they got that initial rental assistance, because that was the first thing that got deposited into their account or the first check that they got from FEMA, they had immediate needs: diapers, food, clothing. And unfortunately, because that was the first money that got to them through FEMA, is they spent it on clothing and diapers and food and those immediate needs. And the challenge for those people is going to be that they're not going to be eligible for continued rental assistance because they're not going to be able to document that they used that rental assistance on rent. And so that's where things like shelter at home, the manufactured housing units, where those options come into play because a lot of people are going to be ineligible for continued rental assistance because they had to spend it on the things that were, their first and foremost needs right after the event. I wish that there was a better way to do that. I wish that there was better messaging when the money went out in the letter that says, caution, caution, don't spend this on anything but rent or else. But it's not listed that plainly. It's not pointed out that strong. And people run into the problem not at the beginning, but they run into the problem when they need rental assistance a month after the event or 2 months after the event. So I just wanted to make you all aware of that. If you're talking to people that are in that situation, even if you're not, you can help us to help them with that information. Ineligibility for rental assistance does not kick you out of the other housing options, but it does limit those options a little bit. So that's why we're doing shelter at home, and that's why we're working with FEMA to try to speed up the manufactured housing units, because we know that rental assistance is just not working for everybody. Landlords are not making it work in a lot of instances. The location of the rental, some of those places were vacant before the storm for a reason, and people don't want to go live there now. So there are lots of challenges with that, in addition to being ineligible for rental assistance, or how do you keep getting it from FEMA.
Ms. Debbie, you came back in and you shared that because that helps me. It helps Casey. It helps any of us who are in conversations and dialogue about pushing why this is important and why, housing is a big issue. And really the true answer, I believe, part of the true answer is definitely hurrying and getting the MHU in place. And so that I guess that would be part of my next big push, but then also making sure that the members of Congress understand the need. And again, as I stated earlier, some people don't even know that this has even happened. There were some people in Congress when they were bringing this up that I heard that did not know. They did not realize that we had water to the degree that we did, and that many families were displaced. And so the testimonies and you telling the story about the family with the 2-week-old, and people understanding that folks are still living in their cars, or they're living in molded houses, that it's completely unsafe. It has to resonate and get to the proper people. And I'm telling you, I'm definitely going to be the voice. And you sharing this information in this General Assembly where I have others that can actually tell the story like you told it to me, that they can go back and repeat this information is very important. This is the thing that really does bother me. I have to be very honest, because I'm beginning to see it more up close and personal as it relates to people having a hard place to find, a place to live, and I'm running into people who are living in homes that are molded, and I'm trying to tell them that they need to leave, and their only option is to either leave the state for some people, and some people have left, car to move real far away, and they don't want to move that far away. This is the only job they have. And some people act like you can just pick up and go find a job somewhere else. It's not necessarily that easy. So I want you to know we do here, we get it, but we need you to continue to help us. Um, Earlier this week, we had Beyonce's mother came down along with the manager from Essence Magazine and Time, because they have invested in Louisiana and they had heard about what was happening here and wanted to get a better grasp upon what was happening and how they could assist. And so I bring that up to say that there are individuals who are hearing outside of us, outside of government. And how many of y'all know that government cannot fix the problem? Pastor, you said it earlier, just so on target, because this is going to be a but God. You're going to come back and y'all can give testimonies and say, but God. But there are individuals that God, I believe, is going to use. And I had an opportunity to speak to Beyonce's mother, and she shared with me something that she's looking at doing, and I don't want to unveil it yet, but she's looking at doing something that they did in Texas to help people that was monumental. So there are people that are looking to see how they can help us outside of government, because I'm going to tell you, we do not have the answers to all the problems. I wish I could say we did, but we don't. But we're doing the best that we can with what we have. And with FEMA dollars, there comes restrictions in terms of how it can be spent. So some people may say, well, why we can't do this with the Shelter at Home program? Because there are restrictions that say how the money can be used. But this is what I will say, because I was one of the persons who was advocating for the program when it first unfolded and rolled out. It only just put part of a room, and that's something I am pushing forth, that they do a whole room, because I can't understand that concept of the one wall. But to do a whole room, bathroom, and the kitchen area. Well, whatever money you get from FEMA, if you could just take, once you've gotten approval that your house is dry, you just do your wall, put all your walls in. You just begin to do a little bit at a time where you can at least stay in your home. I would encourage you to do that. Just take some of your money, just do a little bit of what you can.